Morning. We will call the special work session for March 2nd, 2021 to order. We're here today to talk about Coachman Park and the performance venue and how we will be managing that facility going forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Halios, our Parks and Rec Director, to give a presentation, and then we can have some open discussion. I don't imagine we're going to come to final conclusions today. We can't vote on anything, obviously, but this is at least a jumping off point. Mr. Halios.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Mayor, council members. Jim Halios, Director of Parks and Recreation. As the Mayor stated, the purpose of this special work session today is to discuss the operational and maintenance roles and responsibilities for the Coachman Park and the Imagine Clearwater Venue Association. So with that, I will begin. In prior discussions, council has indicated that they're possibly interested in partnering with an outside entity for certain aspects of Coachman Park and the performance venue. So I think the question we need to ask ourselves is why does council and staff desire a partner? Is it to financially support and maintain the park, to develop programs, or to establish brands and values for the park? Combination of all three or all three? So when we're talking about potential partner, we want to look at their role within the auspice of what the city currently offers within the park. So is that role, is it from a park management operations standpoint, from a venue management operations standpoint, just capital fundraising, or is it park programming? And one of the things when we're looking at that potential partner role that we have to ask ourselves is, does the partner have the capacity to perform and be successful in that role? And also, we'll get into this further with City Attorney Pam Aiken and Assistant City Attorney Michael Fuino as we discuss, possible charter restrictions and how that could possibly impact the movement of partnership. And as important as it is to discuss, a prospective partner's role, I think it's also important to discuss the possible role for the city and the expectations. So again, we'll go into operating and maintaining the entire park and the venue, just the park, or provide a base level funding for the operations of the park. And again, that I think allows us to look at what the council wants and how is it consistent with the capacity of not only the park but the surrounding downtown and infrastructure, and it's for us to find that sweet spot as we work with different partners throughout the community. I've had several discussions with varying cities, different types of partners, and also consultants related to the creation of partnerships. And through those discussions, we've kind of defined what a successful partner would look like. That partner is going to have a deliberate planning process and robust outreach within the community. Most importantly, is that they're going to have a guaranteed funding stream that is not related to fundraising. As I'm sure the mayor knows from his time sitting on the board with Ruth Eckert Hall and other entities, that is the key, most important thing to have a successful partner is to have that stability, and when we're talking about a revenue stream. And then, again, one of the things that we would look at is, does this partner have the authority to implement diverse revenue streams through leases, events, sponsorship, fundraising? And again, that's where we could get into certain types of restrictions that could be placed upon that partner. Also looking at a clearly defined brand. A clearly defined brand. So is that going to be the role of the partner, or is that the role of the city? Is that, again, a partnership gained through both, and looking at those values and how they reflect community engagement, environmental preservation, and cultural experiences. Having a diverse board of directors, but last, certainly not least, is have a defined relationship and expectations with the city as it goes to the partnership. These are different structures, and I'll go into them in a little more detail on the other slide. I like to use graphics, and it's kind of easy, fun look at this. These are the different types of park management structures, and I think we're going to go into a discussion on how we envision the park operating. As you move from left to right on this scale, you'll see that starting with joint operation, private management with public support, and then just straight up private management, those become more restrictive based on the type of restrictions we have based on the special act of the charter, and we'll get into those in a little bit. So going back to that first slide, these are the different types of organizational structures, and I'll lend an example with each. So the first one would be the city owns and operates all aspects of the park, just pretty much like we had with Coachman Park prior, like we have with Crest Lake Park coming up. The city owns and provides a base level of funding and leases all or some of the portions of the park for operating entity. That could be, kind of on a newer paradigm, the pier in the city of St. Pete, where it's certain parts are owned and operated by, all parts are owned by the city, but then certain parts are operated by a vendor or contractor. The next one would be the city owns and an outside group helps with some projects for programming. Again, charter issues involved with this one as well as the previous one. An example of that would be like the Friends of the Riverwalk over in Tampa, where they actually program the certain events in the park, and then they will do capital fundraising for different types of structures and implementations that will help with that programming. The next one would be the city owns and leases the operating entity with no additional financial support, similar to what we currently have with Ruth Eckerd Hall and the Capitol Theater. And then the hybrid would be city owns and operates for a short period of time, and then they provide a runway for the operating entity to take off. So again, it's more of just this base operation, get it up and running, and then after a period of successful time, we turn it over to another entity. And again, possible charter issues with that. So through my research, I've identified 3 models that could be implemented for Coachman Park and the performance venue. And the first one that we looked at is actually the Bay in Sarasota. It's their conservancy. They are responsible for the operation and maintenance and programming of a 52-acre bayfront park. The conservancy oversees fundraising and construction of the park in phases. So through my discussions with their chief implementation officer, what they do is they worked actually almost all the same partners we work with, Sasaki, HR&H, and also with the construction. I believe Skanska may have a part in that, and also Stantec as well. And what they do is the park's being implemented in phases, so the conservancy is tasked with fundraising for those different phases of the park. So what will happen is that once they receive enough funding, they go forward and implement those phases. Again, we'll get into it, but they have some unique funding streams that allow them to do this. So that conservancy still does receive annual support and funding from the city for maintenance. It's basically consistent with the maintenance level currently at that park. So it is not increased due to the enhancements. It'll be a standard level that's currently in action. The city of Sarasota also contributes annually to capital funding, but the capital funding is strictly for infrastructure in the park that's in the ground, sidewalks, things of that nature. Anything that's added per the conservancy, that the capital funding is their responsibility. And again, the unique funding stream that they have is they have TIF for their capital dollars, so that allows them some different flexibility. The next park that we looked at, and this is probably the one that's most similar to our structure, is the Bayfront Park Trust of Miami. It's a 32-acre waterfront park with a performance venue. And the trust is set up, it consists of 9 members. They're all appointed by the city commission. And then one of the members of the trust, and actually the chair of the trust, is a member of the city commission. So the trust is responsible for hiring and firing of the CEO. And then the CEO is responsible for all aspects of park operation. Up until probably 3 to 5 years ago, from what I gathered speaking with their CEO, is that the trust received an annual operating subsidy from the city of Miami. I asked them, okay, well, what changed and what made this something that was more profitable, and is that they were able to enter into a long-term agreement with Live Nation to run their amphitheater that they have. So they receive a substantial amount of money from Live Nation to run the amphitheater. And again, they have very unique funding streams where they receive funding from all the adjacent parking lots and garages, and also boat slip rentals. So again, something a little bit different, a little bit unique, but that when you look at it, and after I dove in it for a while, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, well, how are they able to sustain this level of organization and this budget level with a constant stream, and having the ability to have those funding streams, I think is very unique, and it was important for them. And the final one that we looked at was the Friends of Riverwalk. So again, the city is the public provider, and the Friends are really more concerned with the generation of events and programming, and also marketing and working with the city to market not only Riverwalk, but the events that they have down there. And like we talked about earlier, they raise funds for enhancements, so shade structures, docks, things of that nature, and also for educational opportunities. So what we have that we looked at are kind of just three different models: the Conservancy, the Trust model, and then the Friends model. And again, based on how we move forward, the one thing I gather from speaking with all three of these people is that these models and these entities usually occur of their own volition, and to let the community decide what level and what type of organizational support they're willing to participate in. And that was one thing that was stressed, is that don't try to rush the process. If it takes a little bit longer than it should, that's why we talk about the runway model. Then that's what we do. But again, engage with the community and our stakeholders to ensure that. So next, what I wanted to do is kind of take a look on the venue and the park side of what the different parameters would look like if the city operated it or if a partner operated it. And from a partner operated perspective, it's more about how it affects the city. So from a city operated perspective, legal, it's allowed under the current rules, no issue. Staffing, we really would look to have a higher level of staffing, because again, in order for the venue to be successful, it needs to be marketed. We need to have talent, people to acquire the talent, but also the city has strict policies and procedures when it comes to financial management and cash handling, and we would need a level of expertise that would be able to be in compliance with those procedures. When we talk about risk, when I say high, more of a financial high risk, because if we're tasked with bringing in that talent, we need to ensure that we bring in the talent and the number of shows that is needed to financially support the operation. And so what's the benefit of us operating a venue? We don't have a charter change, and we control all aspects of the operation. So now looking to a partner-operated venue from our perspective, again, a legal perspective would be there could be possible charter issues. Staffing, for us, that's a benefit. It's going to be much lower, and depending on the lease, maybe zero. And then when I go to risk, I probably used the wrong word, high there. I think it'd be more possible exposure. And the possible exposure for that would be if the operator or partner was not successful, we would need to step in and run the operation. And again, are we prepared to do that? How long would it take us to ramp that up? Will we be able to put that type of information into an agreement to allow us to have that flexibility? So again, the benefit of it you look at is a mitigated direct financial risk, reduced day-to-day operational costs. So again, you can kind of see the pros and cons from our perspective of a city versus partner-operated venue. Now looking at a park-operated venue, again, from our perspective, legally, no issues there. It's allowed under our current rules. Staffing, we would need additional staff to maintain the park at a level consistent with the investment, and also consistent with our expectation of the investment, much like we do with Beach Walk now. Risk, again, moderate to low. Benefit is the programming, we control everything, and it's maintained by the city, and it can be planned based on your priorities. So from that park partner-operated lens, again, legal, could be some possible charter issues. Staffing, we wouldn't have no exposure with that, and be much lower depending on the lease. Risk, again, we're going to go with more of the possible exposure. That would just be if the partner couldn't succeed in the park operations or park programming. Again, we would need to step in. So reward is that we don't have direct responsibility for the resource, for the management or the programming, and then in that park, so we can focus on other areas and expand our resource pool to the rest of the city. So the last page is kind of our the recommendations made based on research. And again, this is just something for us to talk about and digest. I kind of did a strategic plan for a short-term, medium-term, and long-term when it comes to the operation and maintenance of the park. So for the short term, I'm talking today until we open the park. One of those suggestions would be to hire a general manager to begin staffing and operational models for the park. And I think that really allows us to have an industry expert to develop proper staffing and operational models, and also to begin to program the venue. But the general manager can also provide feedback to staff and consultants as we're constructing the venue, to look at best practices from an industry standpoint. And as well, they can start programming the venue, because a lot of these shows looks a year to 2 out as when you start booking, so we need to start thinking about that now. Also in that short term would be to engage with a community stakeholder, engage with a consultant to engage with our community stakeholders to look at developing a framework for potential partnership. So this is almost kind of like a bifurcated approach. We have our city-led approach on one hand, and then the partner approach led on the other hand, so we can get a determination from the public just as to what kind of level of interest and level of comfort they have in engaging with us to partner within the park. So the medium term would be to continue to develop those partnerships and evaluate and address the operational capacity of the venue. Again, examine needed charter issues if council decides that they would like to look at partnership in different ways. And long-term would just be to determine and implement the most viable and economically sustainable model for management of the venue and the participation of our partners, so that we can all be successful. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Before I go to questions for Mr. Halios, Ms. Aiken, do you want to just give a brief outline of some of the legal issues with the different opportunities? I think that'll frame some of the conversation.
Mr. Fuino, do you want to do that? I've had Mr. Fuino working on this, and I can supplement that information.
Okay.
Good morning, Mayor, members of council. Michael Fuino, Assistant City Attorney. The main charter issue that we have is a legal issue. It's a charter issue in that the charter says that no city-owned property around the park can be sold, leased, transferred, or otherwise used other than for a public facilities purpose. So when I spoke to the director, I said, well, if you just wanted to hire someone to cut the grass, that's not a charter issue. If you wanted to hire a plumber to look at the pipes for the splash park, that's not a charter issue. But if you want to actually hire or partner with a venue manager that's going to require a lease, which is, I don't want to speak for Mr. Halios because he's certainly capable of speaking for himself, but that's where I think we're heading towards. That is a charter issue. That's not an insurmountable charter issue. It's just going to require council to have a public hearing to find that whatever it is that we're suggesting is in the public interest, and then to have a referendum on the topic. So if we go that route, staff may think it's a great idea, council may think it's a great idea, but it'll be really ultimately up to the public to decide on that.
So differentiate between a lease and an operating agreement.
What Michael was discussing was actually leasing the property, turning control to the property over to an operator of some sort or a conservancy of some sort. If you want to just enter into an operational agreement where they don't, where all they're doing is running your facility for you, that would not require a lease. We would do that under, like we have Capitol Theater. But keep in mind there are different restrictions on different properties. This property is unique from, say, Ruth Eckerd Hall or Capitol Theater. So if you wanted to turn control completely over to a either an operator or a conservancy, then we would need to amend the charter to permit that. If all you want to do is give an operating agreement, then you would not have to do that. But then that does limit how much control you have to retain.
Well, there's no way for us to alleviate ourselves of all risk, right? There's always going to be some level of risk.
Yes.
Because ultimately we're going to retain ownership of the park.
Yes, always.
And we are kind of the lender of last resort, more or less, for the park. I mean, that's just always going to be the way it is. It is with other places around the city as well, so. Okay. Any questions for Mr. Fuino? Vice Mayor?
Okay, I like your explanation of the different roles besides conservancy that other places are doing. My question is, on the venue, could we have multiple operating agreements on that, or, I mean, I don't know if we could turn it over to like one person. I know we've discussed 2 or 3 different organizations that would like to do, and I know we have some issues with, hopefully Tallahassee can come back with some things. I know the firearm thing would limit some of the bigger organizations from wanting to do shows in the park, but my question is multiple operating agreements?
So what we currently do now is that you basically license the facility, you license the use to whoever's coming in to use it. It's not really an operating agreement. We operate the current facility, correct, Jim? And then we license that out. So you can continue that model.
Okay.
Typically, operating agreements tend to be exclusive because someone's coming in, putting in an investment, and I've not seen multiple operating agreements for one facility. Jim?
Yes, that's correct. And as we went back to one of the examples was the Bayfront Park Trust in Miami. They have an exclusive use agreement with Live Nation, and like as City Attorney Pam Aiken said, they're looking at how they're going to protect their investment. That if they're committing to X number of shows here, then you're committing to them. So that exclusive use agreements are pretty much the norm. And I can bring up Chris Cook. Chris, do you want to answer that?
Well, if you're doing multiples and you want the operator to put money into the facility,
Right. Well, that's
you've
what
got to give them the ability to recoup
I
that money.
understand that, but if I mean, the capital part of it looks like we're putting into the project, so the operator, we're looking at just bringing in performances. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Chris Cook, Parks and Rec, and the Events and Athletics Senior Manager. With one operator, they have their interest in their own self-interest, which would limit how many other places we could get, whether other options exist, how many city-run events we wanted to do, and things of that nature.
Well, that was my concern, because I know Florida Orchestra has expressed interest, and, you know, we wanted to be able to do other things besides just all concerts or performances. We maybe want to use the venue for some city things for our public to come in free of charge. So, well, Jazz Holiday is a good example, that kind of thing. So we would just, if we did that, would that be more of a licensing thing, kind of a continuation of what we're doing now?
So you can do it either way. We could do a agreement, as we've been talking about, and reserve in that agreement the right to have and put on certain events in the city. So we could say we're going to have certain events that we promote. And they probably require us to be fairly specific about that, because they're not going to want us to compete with what they promote.
Right.
Or we can operate it and then simply license each event as it comes in. So, and then of course we can put on whatever events we want to. And they've outlined what those expenses would look like for the city, basically.
It's all the way you write the contracts. I mean, currently
Yeah.
we used to have Clearwater Chorus had so many days a year that they could use Ruth Eckerd Hall. It was a Clearwater event, but it was written into the contract that they could do that. I think we still have so many days we're allowed to use the venue. Same thing with Capitol if we want to.
Capitol Theater, definitely we do.
Yeah. Councilmember Beckman?
Yeah, I have a question about, there's phrasing, that says, if we only want an operating agreement, it limits how much control we will need to retain. So do we have, what does that look like as far as how much control we must retain? You know, how is it weighted, and what kind of things would we retain control over, if we wanna?
So what I was trying to distinguish is the difference between a lease and an operating agreement. When you lease property to someone, they basically have operation control, sometimes maintenance responsibilities, and more importantly for our charter provision, we can't lease that property.
Right.
We can only give, we could do an operating agreement.
Right.
And we can do licensing, which is very temporary in nature and which does not convey an interest in the property. So those were the distinctions I was trying to make.
Okay. I'm just, yeah, and so if we're going to lease it, we have to go for a charter.
Yes,
If we're going to have an operating agreement, we have to maintain some control. And what I'm trying to understand is what kind of control would we be in charge of if we have an operating agreement? So if we have some concert manager that comes in and says they're going to, you know, have 60 concerts a year, what do we retain control of?
basically you tell them how many they can have.
And when they're
Your
having it.
agreement, your operating agreement lays out what you're going to allow them to do.
Okay. And then when the phrasing is it limits how much control we will need to retain, again, that's up to the contract, right? If they're choosing these certain weekends and these prime times and all that. Okay,
Well, like we would retain 4th of July. That would probably be a time that the city would do our normal concert and, you know, retain the park. Again, I think all the devil's in the details, as far as what we restrict and what we allow. And, I mean, first of all, I think we need to separate the park from the venue. Those are two very different operations. I mean, I see the opportunity for a conservancy in the park. The city is not going to raise funds. People are not going to give money to the city. It's tough to raise money for this building. Friends of the library do a marvelous job, but over time, I think we've all seen that, you know, most citizens, unless they're just absolutely passionate about libraries, believe that the libraries are paid for by their taxes and are the responsibility of the city to provide all of those services and upgrades and everything else. Whereas I think a conservancy over in the park can really be beneficial because I think you can get people who are passionate about the park. I mean, we have the president of the board of the Botanical Garden in the audience today. I was down there for a meeting a couple weeks ago, and there was sweat equity going into the ground as he was out in his shorts and working hard to make the Botanical Gardens as wonderful as they are. I think with the park, that's a real opportunity for us to build that conservancy. On the other hand, you know, I'll just be very forthright. I don't think we ought to be running the venue. I don't think we have the expertise.
I agree with that.
I don't think we ought to reinvent the wheel. The wheel has already been invented. And whether we go out for an RFP to find somebody to operate the venue, that's probably the one issue I have with the staff recommendations. I don't know why we would be hiring a general manager right now to begin staffing and operational models. When are we gonna break ground, Mr. Duff?
April? Well, technically, we've already broken ground under, but I think the next phase.
When are we gonna fence off the
major-
park and really start moving dirt?
It'll be closed by the end of April.
Tara, is that right?
Probably May.
Okay, April, May. And then we're looking at 26 months or so?
Yeah, I think March, first, second quarter of 2023.
So it's a long ways away. And I understand the way that shows work, but do you really think we need to hire somebody and have them on the payroll today for a venue that isn't gonna be open for another 29 months?
I think it depends on the model that we look at. You know, if it's something where we're not gonna completely do it in-house and we're not gonna be the sole operator of the venue, then no, we don't need that. And again, when I say immediate, it could be, next fiscal year sometime, when immediate is in that 0 to 2 short-term, timeframe. Probably should have explained that a little better, apologize there. So that's what I'm talking about, is a short term of that 0 to 2, so maybe it's a year and a half out, or, you know, closer to that 2-year mark. But again, it would just depend on what council is comfortable with moving forward as an operational model.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I've never thought that we were the right people to staff the events. I mean, with Ruth Eckerd, we got one of the best in the, around that's right here. And then we've been talking about some other ones. They're the ones that really know the industry and are always in contact with, these performers and can get performers in, depending on their schedules. I know this last year has been a kind of a mess, but I mean, that's what they do. They look out and they find the performers where they're closest in. I really don't want to get the city involved in that. I think we should be looking at probably a license agreement maybe, or something where we get multiple contracts on the venue part of it. But the part of it is a great opportunity for the Conservancy or the Friends of, because there's so much that we really want to put on in the park. I mean, the venue is not the only thing that's going to have performances. I mean, we're going to have hopefully markets and weddings and, I mean, all kinds of things in the park that will be going all the time. And I think we could probably put something together, whatever we decide on for all the programming in the park besides the venue.
Ms. Aiken?
So I'd like some clarification on that. Do you want to allow multiple promoters into the venue, or do you want one operator, one promoter, such as a Live Nation or a Ruth Eckerd Hall, or multiples?
I don't know that part of the industry. That would be a question that I'd have to research more. I don't know if that's a good idea. Maybe they all say, hey, no, we want to be the sole promoter.
And I think that's what they do.
Yes, I can tell you
Yes,
from
what they-
conversations we've had prior, again, to what the mayor said and to what Mr. Cook said, they've expressed that if they're going to commit to, operating that facility for an extended number of shows, that they would expect the commitment on our end to have them be the sole promoter or provider. And I will speak to one of the questions that we asked about earlier when I mentioned the Bayfront Park in Miami, their agreement with Live Nation. They do have 10 to 16 shows a year they're permitted to have in there. So again, it's kind of like what the mayor said, 4th of July, certain shows by the Florida Orchestra, you can look to put those in there. And especially if we're looking at a different type of programming versus what those traditional orchestra, fireworks, things of that nature, I can't really see that the promoter would have much of an issue with that if we spelled out the terms ahead of time.
So would we put an RFP? Is that what we would do for that and get the best? Okay.
But I think you also need to know that even Ruth Eckerd Hall partners with other promoters. So they'll work with Live Nation or they'll work with AEG if they're the ones who are the actual owners of a particular act. So there's partnerships all along the way.
Okay.
But you still have somebody that's spearheading the efforts.
Yes.
So,
And that-
Councilmember
And
Hamilton.
that kind of leads right to my question. Take for instance, in Miami, Live Nation. Does Live Nation work with AEG if they've got a show, a performance that they have the contract for? but they want to put it in that venue. Do those companies work together at all? Fishtail question to that is, how is the amphitheater at the State Fairgrounds operated?
This amphitheater at State Fairgrounds is a Live Nation amphitheater. Correct.
Okay.
And so it's solely operated by and programmed by Live Nation. That's the same as in Miami. So, they really don't reach out to the AEG. It's almost, we're looking at it like you made a great point, Mayor. It's almost like a sub-consultant, So Ruth Eckert has the ability to pull from these other entities for programming because they don't put on the show more or less. It's with Live Nation, or they do in some instances, but in other instances they can do with Live Nation. So that gives them much more flexibility than like a partner like a Live Nation or an AEG, where it would be strictly with those acts that are associated with that.
Yeah, so, that's kind of where I'm looking. I want, the key word of today, diversity. I want a diversity of acts. And if AEG has an act that would be great for our venue, but Live Nation is the one that's operating the venue and we can't get that act, is that where we want to, is that the position we want to be in? I don't know. But, my approach to this has always been, when we started talking about this years ago with the city manager and I, a conservancy for the park and an operator for the venue. Both of them would be partnerships with the city, and there needs to also be communication between the conservancy and the venue operator as well, because we don't want people continually infighting with each other over certain aspects. There has to be a synergy to it. So that's always been my vision and my approach for this. And I'm not saying, I'm not here today to say, I think Ruth Eckert Hall should run the venue, but I think we should have, the more options we have to bring in programming wise into that, the better it is for the people of Clearwater.
Mr. Horn?
Thanks, Mayor. This is a good discussion. This discussion has been long in coming. If you go back to the beginning, and the council at the time was talking about a venue, we were inundated with requests from the major promoters. Initially, they all wanted to be exclusive. The conversations we had with consultants was, don't be exclusive. And part of that had to do with, again, at the time, council articulating some of what I'm hearing this morning, that the city had some particular levels of interest in certain things and wanted to have the ability to do that. So the question is, there's tension, exclusivity versus the kind of flexibility that council members have expressed that they wanted to see in the programming of the facility. Some other comments I've heard this morning speak to what has always been a perspective from some of our council members. And that is a great deal of interest and faith, in promoters that they have worked with in the past that they think can pull it off. And so it seems to me, at least from my perspective, now is the time for you all to really drill down as to how much flexibility you really want and how do you think the structure can best deliver that. Yes, we have experience with Ruth Eckert Hall. The question is, can Ruth Eckert Hall provide the kind of variety and programming, Vice Mayor Albritton, that you kind of talked about? Because I sense you have always wanted to have some level of flexibility. Councilmember Hamilton, the same thing. The question is, can that really occur? In talking to the other promoters, I never got the impression that they were really interested in sharing anything. I mean, they were, because, they have very large operations and they really, kind of wanted to, we can manage the niche the boutique type of facility that we are creating as part of our venue. So I just wanted to share that.
I think it, there's a lot of talk about Ruth Eckerd Hall, and everybody knows I have very close ties with Ruth Eckerd Hall, having served on their board, for 8 years and having been the chairman of the board. As far as diversity goes, there's everything at the hall, from Peppa Pig, to ZZ Top, to the Florida Orchestra. I think, again, going back to contracts, whether it's them or somebody else, you can put into a contract the level of diversity of acts that you want. I still foresee that we will have graduations at the venue. I think we should have a farmer's market. I would like not just musical acts, but I would hope that we could draw, some stage acts that are doing drama as well. I mean, I think there's an opportunity for a lot of things. Ruth Eckerd Hall has been a good partner. I would highly recommend that we have another workshop at some point in the not too distant future and have them come and give a Theater 101. This is something we used to do with new board members. We want them to understand the business a little bit. Doesn't mean we pick them out ultimately, but you ought to know a little bit more about the business and the way it works and promoters and everything else. And they could at least provide a presentation to everybody so that you have a better understanding of just how the whole market works.
And I look at also, looking at Live Nation. If Live Nation is at the amphitheater in Tampa and they were to be operating our venue, how does Live Nation decide which act goes here, which act goes here? Or I don't know that our market is big enough where they're going to put the act in both places. And which, because they've been at the amphitheater longer, does the amphitheater always get first choice and we get leftovers? I don't know how all that works, but I see that as something that potentially could be an issue.
I think that's why we went with the 4,000 seats, so we wouldn't be taking from the other venues that we have. And it's a great, look, I'll tell you, when this park gets done, my vision has always been, this is gonna be where everybody wants to come. It's on the bay, it's just gonna be a beautiful place, just where the artists are gonna wanna come. But here's what happened, I just went to Ruth Eckerd last week. The original booking for the artists that I saw was at Capitol Theater. They sold more tickets, so they moved it to Ruth Eckerd. And they could do the same thing here. And I think that's what, and the amphitheater over there has more seats than we do. So the bigger acts would probably be there, the smaller, the mid-sized ones would be here. And then all the way down to a Ruth Eckerd size. We have just about everything that a promoter would want here as far as the venues.
Well, there's advantages to the flexibility. So not only was Live Nation interested in something if it came here, but I also met with Mr. Vinnick's folks. And they, operate, obviously, Amelie, and they have the Lightning, but they also do concerts there. They are also now running the Yingling Center, which is USF's basketball arena. And, it's different size venues for different size shows. The shows are built for specific type venues. Some are built for indoor arena type venues, some are built for outdoors. But that's kind of what you get to choose from. And all of the acts look for those similar locations. That's why it will be helpful for some of the shows, because they'll go to the amphitheater up in Jacksonville, and then they'll go down in Miami, and then they would come here in Tampa. But I'll remind everybody, at one time, to kind of Councilmember Hamilton's comment, Ruth Eckerd wanted to run the Mahaffey Theater. St. Petersburg opted to go with Mr. Edwards, they thought that they would be getting the leftovers, so to speak. I always thought that was kind of a shame back in 2012 because what it would have done is it would have given operational flexibility. And they know the demographics for different shows. A show that goes well in St. Pete may not do as well in Clearwater and vice versa. You know, let's talk a little bit more about the park, the playground, and the gardens because we've kind of focused mainly on the venue. What is everyone's feelings? And let me ask you something, Mr. Halios, before we go to that. I mean, I know you have some staff recommendations. What would you like to see come out of today's meeting?
I think some direction, and we've got some, as far as, looking at the venue management of it. I think that, from what we're hearing from council and what the manager expressed, we're leaning more towards that operational model, have an outside operator, which is good. It relieves me in a sense of, because there's a lot of financial responsibility involved with the amphitheater and the venue. From a park perspective, and this is where I think we're all on the same page, is I do envision a conservancy or a friends group to offer some type of limited programming within the park and then take ownership of certain aspects of the park. So what I would like is a little direction on, maybe looking to start that grassroots effort with that conservancy and those friends groups by, enlisting, spoken to a couple consultants that I think will be able to kind of come on and determine what structure is going to work best for us within that organization model that, we've presented. And that, now that I know kind of, I wouldn't say the amphitheater is off the table, but we want to focus more with the conservancy on the park side. That will allow me to kind of hone in on that, create that level of interest in that grassroots effort and build something. So that way, when we do open the gates to the park, we have an interested group that's participating, ready to program, ready to help in those aspects.
How long is the CRA down in Sarasota, do you know? Seeing as they're using TIF money?
I'll double check on that. So,
Okay.
But it's been quite a while, and it's funny that you mentioned it. One of the things we talked about, and actually they asked me, they go, who's going to run your theater? Because the conservancy is different than the Van Weitzel that's out there. And the model is the city was running the Van Weitzel, and they're like, yeah, no, we're getting out of that business, for a lot of the things that you'd mentioned.
Ms. Aiken, legal issues with the conservancy?
It depends upon how you want them to operate. You cannot lease the park to them. You can have a conservancy that you pay for services. So you would either pay for them to do the services or they can raise the money to do the services. You can allow them to do programming. The park, for the most part, much of the park is subject to the special act restriction that requires it to be open to the public. Which doesn't mean you can't have limited events or special events. So I don't really see any major issues with the conservancy and the park area. The larger issue is what you do with the venue.
Vice Mayor?
So, if we were to put together a conservancy for the park, I kind of see that one of their jobs would be fundraising, to do projects and to do the programs they want to do. Would they be able to, and I know I'm not saying exclusive, but after the park is open and we do our naming rights or whatever for the main thing, would they be able to like sell bricks or naming rights for certain parts of it to raise money?
If you give them the authority for that and establish the guidelines for it, sure.
Okay.
Councilmember Beckman?
Okay, so I just want to be clear when we talk about a conservancy for the park side versus the venue side and things like farmers markets and different craft shows and things like that. When I think of Imagine Clearwater, I think of we have a park area and then we have a venue area. And we don't have a whole lot of shade except for, the shaded venue. And so I thought that there were conversations about having farmers markets and different events under that shaded area.
Yeah.
Not over on the park side of it. Is that?
In the shade underneath the venue.
Okay, so when we talk about a park conservancy, they get full access to all the acreage. Is that right? It's not
Depends
just
how we
a
write-
park section?
Well, you're gonna have to deal with conflicts, obviously.
Right, conflicts with the venue organizer, right, who wants to
Correct.
bring in concerts, primarily at night, right, unless it's a weekend. And then we have conceivably a park conservancy that wants to do Shakespeare in the Park and craft fairs and a Battle of the Bands and local things and graduations and all that business, right? And so there's got to be, some kind of coordination between those two groups, right? One brings in money, or maybe,
Hopefully.
yeah.
What I see is a pyramid. I mean, really, I see a pyramid with three parts. I see a conservancy and a venue operator with the city on top.
The city managing or overseeing both a all-volunteer conservancy that's going to raise funds and promote neighborhood kind of resident down-homey things, and then a venue operator such as Ruth Eckerd Hall that will bring in larger acts for the stage venue.
With the city over
Okaying or managing, contracting.
coordinating, I would say,
Pardon?
and making certain that coordinating.
Yeah, I think coordinating is a better word. The whole idea of having that conservancy to offer that programming is to alleviate and not have to bring on more staff to provide those programs. So when we talk about, coordination, and again, it's maybe a member of that operating entity is on the board of the conservancy, and they work hand in hand like that. We don't want to get into having to be the police for dispute resolution between the two entities, because then that's going to create an acrimonious relationship that's not going to benefit anybody. But, what we need to do is look out how we find that balance.
Ms. Aiken and then the vice mayor.
Ms. Beckman, you mentioned an all-volunteer conservancy. If you look at the models that Mr. Halley has presented, the trust, at a minimum, has staff.
That's correct, and even the Friends of the Riverwalk, which I think is probably the most likely, at least initially, model that we look at, they have a president or a full-time manager that manages their responsibilities to manage those volunteers, manage those events, and be the liaison with the city of Tampa. And that's kind of how I envision it as we move forward, because again, that allows us for more of a contract management model than an active management and programming model.
And the reason I mentioned that is because each of these models, they're not all volunteer. They have the organization that goes along with them.
Yeah,
And so they have to get funding from somewhere. The city funds them, they may do some of their own fundraising, they may end up with funding sources from the brick sales, the kind of things like that, the naming.
Grants.
But, exactly, but these are,
No,
these,
I made note of that on,
Okay.
PowerPoint slide 12 or whatever, that, there is a steady stream of funding for
Well,
those.
and there is an organizational demand.
Well, you also have to have some staff, because volunteers are wonderful, but when you're a volunteer, if something comes up, you take care of, whatever comes up. You have to have somebody that's actually there, that's gonna make sure the trains run on
And
time.
if the city is the staff, then you haven't accomplished your goal. And because you could have the city being the staff and have these volunteers operate around them like we do in most of the situations that we have. But then I don't think you will have accomplished the goal you're going for.
Vice Mayor and then Councilmember
Yeah,
Hamilton.
I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, Councilman Beckman. The venue has a nice roof that everybody really thinks is great to cover the seating, because in the Florida you have the hot summers and so forth. But I always envision like markets and things. Listen, we have a huge grass area. I mean, it's 3 times bigger than Coachman Park now. And I see most of the time you have events where you have markets, people bring their tents and, you know, people walk outside. So, I mean, we could have that going at the same time we have other things going. We just have a huge opportunity for lots of different things going on at the same time, without even mentioning the venue. I mean, I see that some things could be in the venue as well, but the rest of the park is, we have so much room to do so many other things. So I just wanted to mention that we could be having a combination of things going on at the same time.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Well, Vice Mayor basically said exactly what I was going to say. You know, the park itself with the large green lawn, you know, farmer's market, when we had our farmer's market downtown, when we had it in the park, in the City Hall parking lot, you know, the vendors all bring their own tent to set up their little, their wares and their vegetables and everything else. And then, you know, the customers just came and kind of walked from tent to tent, and I think the park will be providing some amount of shade in different areas of it. But that's why I say, you know, the farmer's market, I don't really see the farmer's market being at the band shell unless it's in a very limited circumstance where there's not a performance scheduled to be there and it's inclement weather, then maybe that it can move underneath. But I think primarily something like a farmer's market is going to should be programmed out on that lawn in the park area itself, because if you do have inclement weather, but there's an act scheduled in the venue, that coordination isn't going to work very well. You're going to basically have to cancel the farmer's market for that day due to weather. But so yeah, that was that. But it's just, that's why I say there has to be great coordination and great, you know, everybody's going to have to work together, make sure everybody's pulling in the same direction regarding the band shell operation of that and the conservancy aspect of park operations.
Councilmember Beckman, did you have something?
Yeah, with us talking about, you know, people on the lawn and the grass and under the venue, can you just speak to us about any environmental impact studies or infrastructure analysis or anything like that that's been done on this property right here at the water?
I do not believe that we have done anything as far as an environmental impact study with the new park coming on.
Mr. Dell?
No, we did not do an environmental impact study for the park per se. I mean, we're tripling the amount of, you know, green and open
Green
space, so I
space,
think
yeah.
the general direction would be less site coverage, less pavement, but no, not a specific environmental from the standpoint of the venue
Or the infrastructure or anything like that?
No, and that,
Streets
again,
or-
could be something that is, I don't know how we address that in an agreement with an operator, but that's what we're gonna learn through time, you know, where that sweet spot is with ever the frequency or number of shows, capacity. How do we find something in the middle there that's gonna, you know, allow us for those areas to regenerate and, you know, not break down? And we're still, I mean, how many years are we in on Beach Walk, and we're still trying to find that sweet spot on there. So I think with time, you know, we try to figure out those things.
Are we currently retaining the water at Coachman, or does it go into the bay?
I'll have to ask.
A.
Okay.
And after the project is done?
Same.
Okay.
Similar.
So it's not going into the pond?
The pond's not big enough for everything.
Will some be going into that?
Yes.
I think the answer to that, I believe the answer is yes. We're going to improve the stormwater treatment there. There really is none at this point. But it may not, I think as Tara said, what I've been told is that it's not full capacity, but it will improve the water quality to some extent as it filters through the pond area.
And the pervious surface area in the park is gonna
Yes.
be greatly increased.
Yes, Tara Kivett, city engineers. I apologize for speaking from the back. But yes, as they've already pointed out, a significant reduction in impervious surface. The pond will improve some water quality due to its retention and its treatment. We do also have some low-impact design components as part of this park in the storm arena. So overall, I see it as an improvement, an environmental improvement, and we have not done a study.
Thank you. So would you all consider having another meeting where we talked about the venue and had somebody come in and talk to us?
Yeah.
Okay. What else? Mr. Horn? Mr. Halios?
In regards to having that secondary meeting, would you like me to explore more of kind of the operating agreements and those types of partnerships so we can have a framework in place for that discussion?
I think it would be good for everybody to see the operating agreement, for instance, at the Capitol Theater. And some of the restrictions and some of the things that we're allowed to do there. Also, there was money put aside.
Yeah, I think that,
You don't
That-
think that's a good model?
that's a unique model. I'm not sure that that is necessarily the model we would use. I think what we might want to look at is in more detail the Miami model and look at the kind of limitations operators require if they're going to be your operator. So I think we need to do a little more look. The Capitol Theater was it's a great agreement for the Capitol Theater. Since we have inspection, we have operation, we have maintenance, we have a fund for repair, etc. I'm not sure your new agreement would look that much like that.
Mr. Horn?
Just one, continuing on, I think what we've seen with the Capitol Theater, very few areas of conflict. And so one of the things that I would like you all to be thinking about is really a framework that really kind of minimizes that. Because that's how sometimes you all will be drawn into conflict resolution involving a framework that you thought pretty much addressed that. And so that's just something, I mean, that's what I think about. And part of that has to do with our community, how our community operates, our community desires. And so the best that we can really sort out who's got control, who doesn't have control, then I think we'll find ourselves with minimizing some of that conflict downstream.
Councilmember Bunker and then Councilmember Hamilton.
For this next meeting, do we want to bring in just Ruth Eckerd Hall, or do we want representatives of other organizations like Live Nation?
We can ask them to come. It's just an issue of, who's local.
Okay.
That's the only reason I suggested that. But if somebody from Live Nation or AEG wants to come, that's fine.
All right, thank you.
Somebody else that we could talk to is the management of the folks up. We could do it probably by phone, but the folks that manage the amphitheater up in St. Johns County, which is outside Jacksonville, which is the most recent similar type facility that's been opened.
Exactly. We've actually done a study with them, and Mr. Cook has been in touch with them as far as, and that was, if we ever went with the staff operational model, that's the one that we would have mirrored after, just because, like the mayor said, it's the most similar. And, going back to, that's more just strictly a venue, but like their friends group is all programming related and outreach. So that's, kind of, like we talked about different conservancy for the park, and then the venues would be separate because of things like that. And
St. John's does operate that
They do.
facility themselves.
yes, with
That is
21 full-time staff.
Government-owned facility.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I did talk to that manager on St. Augustine back when we were talking about venue size, and he had a lot of interesting things that he relayed to me. One was they started with 2,500 seats, and they kept adding on until they got to where they are now. I think they've got close to 7. But, you know, they had to find their sweet spot. And it was interesting how they went about that. So that would be a good, to get him on the phone if you could.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Well, my question is more towards, it seems, my take on what we've heard from everybody today, I think we're pretty much all in agreement of the conservancy approach to the park. Now my question is, do we want Mr. Halios to come back to us with a recommendation on how many people should be on our conservancy? How big should it be? When should we be looking at putting people in that position? Because during the construction of the park, the conservancy can be working very hard, I believe, during the construction. Because if the conservancy wants to raise money by doing a certain part of the walkway around through the park with bricks that you can purchase and put your name on or something of that nature, during construction is the time to do that, not after construction. You know, so bottom line, do we want that direction as well? Do we want
I think that ought to be resolved sooner than later. I also, you know, when we were talking about the overall Imagine Clearwater, we talked about naming rights. That is a process that, depending on who's going to spearhead it, we ought to start thinking about. You ought to be thinking about it now, because all of the structure should be put into place before the project is complete, when people can start to see it, you know, coming to fruition. But going back to, you know, how much the naming right is it going to be for a limited period of time, or is it going to be in perpetuity? You know, how are you going to maintain that recognition? If you ever tear something down that somebody did help pay for, are you going to continue to recognize them in some way? There's all sorts of moving parts to that process, and I'm sure some of them are affected by the charter too. So I think that is something that we ought to be working on. Councilmember Beckman.
Yeah, Mr. Halios, on the last slide, it says staff recommendations. So I just had a basic question of who weighed in on the staff. Was it finance as well as Parks and Rec and all the higher ups for these short-term, medium-term? So our short-term strategic plan recommendation was to hire a general manager to begin staffing and operational models for a venue, enlist a consultant to engage with community stakeholders, and staff to develop a framework for a potential partnership. So
Yeah, those were, and I'm going to speak more to the conservancy model because, again, that short term was based on us being the operator. So now that we know that's not the direction we want to look at, but as far as the conservancy model, it was myself, Ms. Thompson, the CRA director, and then meeting with Assistant City Manager Delk and Assistant City Manager Maxwell, talking about how we, you know, kind of coalesce these different stakeholders and these partnerships. And it goes to actually what Councilmember Hamilton was saying, is that what is the structure and the makeup going to be of a conservancy? And I think that's where, when I was asking to do some outreach with a professional to bring in where they can provide us that type of feedback, and they speak with you, they speak with the community stakeholders that are interested in different partners, and then they can come back to council with a recommendation of, okay, this is what the community structure we've heard, this is what we think it would look like. So that was going to be my next question, and ask the comfort level of council if we could go forward with exploring that possibility, with bringing on a consultant to vet these different ideas with yourself and also our community stakeholders to see where the model, that sweet spot for that model of just the park conservancy lies.
Okay, Mr. Delk.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Getting back to Councilman Beckman's question to Jim, I have encouraged him to put in there a program for getting staff online sooner rather than later in order to help us conclude the design. So part of that encouragement comes directly from me. A couple of reasons for that. I think, I'd like to, in fairness, to mention to you. One is that historically, we've done probably 12 or 15 shows a year. I think we're building a venue that is going to warrant and justify a much higher level of usage. I think you all have been presented that in the past, to the point where I think we've even envisioned 60 or 70 shows a year potentially out of the venue. So there we're talking about having a venue activity every 5 to 7 days on average. We're in a point where, from a park planning standpoint, in fact, we're going to be talking to you about this over the next couple of weeks, adding back some costs of some of the operational matters in the venue, as well as some VE items that you've already directed us to add back. So we're going to adjust the overall park project cost. So engineering is currently working on that. We want to try to make sure that whenever we come and have that next conversation with you, it's as complete as we can possibly make it at this juncture. So, I think we tried to get some things eliminated from a value engineering standpoint that were not directly related to the infrastructure of the park, which is why we're ready to break ground in April or May. So we're on the way to building this park. I think finance has justifiably pointed out that some of those operational things, even if they came in next year's budget, are going to be tied to Imagine Clearwater and the project. So it really makes no difference whether we do that next year or this year. So we're gonna revisit that infrastructure and those components. The reason that I say that is that I had talked to Jim about the approach based on the current charter limitations, and that we wanted to have someone to assist us from a professional standpoint in terms of finalizing the audio-visual components of the venue on our behalf, as well as some of the operational characteristics of that. These were anticipated. I think, and even looking back to the original Imagine Clearwater document, the drafters of that, our consultants mentioned that we may want to extend back a house and, removal seating, a lot of these things that we're doing. Okay, so, but those require a higher level of detail. And so, assuming that we had a model where the city managed and administered the infrastructure, which is what our current kind of limitation suggests, I'd encourage Jim to look at getting somebody, a facility manager on board sooner rather than later, in order to help us finalize, do we really need $3 million worth of audiovisual infrastructure in there, or can we do something less than that? So I think that's the kind of the almost kind of a cautionary discussion he and I were having about how to best get ourselves represented in defining the details. We will not be able to run this facility with a special event committee. And so I think, your direction this morning has been helpful, but that is why we precipitated that conversation with Jim about the FTE at this early stage.
So what I'd like to do is potentially schedule something for the week of the 22nd, which is an off week, so that we don't have a work session, council meeting, and a special work session all in the same week. I think that should give staff enough time to figure out how much potentially it's going to cost to hire a consultant to look at, the conservancy and the other elements. That will give us time to coordinate with the amphitheater up in St. Augustine and potentially with AEG, Live Nation, Ruth Eckerd Hall, for somebody to talk about the operations and what that looks like. I think we're going to want to know roughly how much the consultant's going to cost.
I have a general idea. I actually reached out, but I can get some more numbers firmed up based off of the discussion today, the level of detail that they'll need to go into, so I can have those numbers for you.
And the specific work product that we can expect back. Okay. Councilmember Beckman, did you have a question?
Yeah, just a couple of comments about, and again, I haven't been involved with this for as long as most of you have, but, when we were here in April or May and voted for the 4,000 seat covered amphitheater, there was some discussion about reporting that we'd be operating at about over a $2 million deficit each year with that size of an amphitheater. And so now we're looking for, a contract, operating contract with someone to operate it, which I'm in favor of. I don't think our city parks and rec or city staff has the expertise to operate that size of a venue. But it does seem with, different supports for a conservancy and hiring or having a contract with an operator is going to be a cost. And that $2 million operating deficit was kind of dismissed in the spring as, well, I don't really trust that report. It's not really going to take that many FTEs and all that. And it seems like now we're coming back with, yeah, this is going to be a significant cost. So that's one thing I wanted to, that's going on here in my head. And if it needs to be corrected, feel free. But the other thing is, I think the information I have about conservancies and having residents and locals support a big effort like this is it generally has to start from the group, from, they're the ones who initiate it and want it and push for it and work very hard to get that conservancy up and going and donating. And to me, some of the feelings I get from residents is, wow, our park is expensive. It's over $69 million. And before we even put a shovel in the ground, now we're talking about a community kind of conservancy that's going to fundraise for their park and for, shade and benches and different features like that we're going to add on. I mean, yes, that conservancy can also schedule Shakespeare in the park and graduations and dog shows and craft fairs, but, are they going to be tasked with really, if you want that there, you go raise money for it? I don't, is that the message? Am I reading that wrong?
I think first of all, the park, when it's completed, is going to be magnificent, and if nothing else was added, it's going to be magnificent. What I hope is that people buy into making this a dynamic place, that over time, we may make changes, we may add things. There may be something that the public really wants. I don't have an example, but let's, say that there's something that they really, say they want to do a butterfly garden. Mm-hmm. And people are passionate about that. I think the mechanism to do that is the conservancy. I mean, if you go down to the botanical gardens, and I know you've been, in contact, and we talked about writing letters for a grant for them that's, really going to be more of a children's garden. Mm-hmm. They're constantly evolving. And that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at Clearwater Marine Aquarium, they've constantly been evolving. They built a new space that they're going to bring new exhibits to. The first one's going to be a whale exhibit that's going to take up most of that new floor. If you look at the art museums, they're constantly bringing in traveling art. And that's one of the reasons that people want to go back. It's new things that you bring to the park. And in my opinion, the Conservancy can do some of that so that there are changes to the park. And, that's why we want diverse programming of both the amphitheater and the park itself, is that there's something always new. Mm-hmm. And I'll be one of the first people to donate money to the Conservancy, because I also think we ought to have a mechanism to build an endowment. Because one of my greatest fears is that we build something wonderful, but we don't maintain it to the level that keeps it that way. We always find capital dollars, right? Throughout the years, we've always found capital dollars for things. It's the maintenance and operations that get you.
What about the idea of having, if we're going to lean towards a conservancy for, I'm gonna call, I mean, parks and residents, I don't know, or, I don't know how we wanna phrase it for everyday events or something other than large venue concerts. I would think we might wanna have a presence in the park, a small building, some kind of a presence in the park where it's identified as, this is the Conservancy. And if you like this park and, you know, you like the splash pad and whatever else, or you'd like a butterfly garden, or you'd like to donate, I think they need to have a presence there in the park, and probably up near, you know, the entrance, the gateway entrance, either a small building or something that, you know, draws attention to them. I can't imagine they'd be in the back of the house, you know, little office in there. Who's gonna know they even exist, you know? So that might be something to think about as we place buildings and, you know, figure out things in the park.
They could do that with a kiosk, you know, in the entrance.
I think it should be something more permanent. I don't know.
Pam?
The only structures you can build on that property are the ones that have already been identified in the charter, unless you have an additional referendum to permit one. So keep in mind, everything that gets built and on that property below that 28-foot line specifically, has got to be charter approved, and all these improvements are. So we can't add new buildings without a referendum. What you got is, what you approved is what you've got.
Well, I voted for it. I didn't vote for anything that described a 4,000-seat covered amphitheater.
You did vote for a performance venue with removable seating.
Okay.
Now, with the structures, with the buildings, we were specific as to square footage. Not location necessarily, but square footage.
We were specific as to like how many bathrooms and that specific?
Square footage, not how many bathrooms. Now, we did not have square footage for the bathrooms specifically, but for example, the harbor master, that was 1,200 square feet, I think. Anyway, it was specific. Whatever it is, we designated this how many square feet you can have. Restrooms, we did not limit. Those are, but you're not talking about a restroom.
We're gonna have future referendums though, on
I
a
would
number of
assume.
things. And if that's something that we wanna have a welcome center, you know, for the Conservancy to have a permanent home, that's certainly something we can add to a referendum down the road. Cause I'm assuming we're gonna have something coming out of the RFPs and other
Yes.
things. So that would be the appropriate time to address the issue. Mr. Dahl?
Yes, Mayor, we did have some occupiable space under the plaza originally. We value engineered that component out of the park. So I think there was some, I think we had thought of that as a possible will call window area, ticket sales, maybe even some small, you know, pop-up kind of retail things related to events in the park, some of that. So, but that space, occupiable space under the plaza is been removed.
So other questions or comments? Councilmember Hamilton?
Just everybody looks at things differently, and I'm a you know, glass half full guy. Because I look at this, and I've told people this, you know, they say, oh man, it's costing too much money, and I say, no. Let me ask you let me put it to you this way. To me, it's an investment of $70 million, an investment of $70 million that's going to last multiple generations. So I can get past the big number cost because I'm looking at the benefit long term. I mean, that's my business background, is that when you're going to be in business, you're going to make an initial investment in that business, but your payback, you're going to get payback and you're going to benefit from it for years and years and years to come. So none of this scares me. I know what Clearwater has. I know what Clearwater's makeup is, and I know the passion of this city. And as this thing comes to fruition and starts coming together, I think I'll be shocked if we don't have people just screaming to participate and looking for ways to be involved. So I'm not, none of this frightens me. None of this.
Councilmember Bunk?
Well, investment, but I'm happy we're moving ahead with it. And I like, you know, the vision that we were talking about today for both the park and the venue. I look forward to lots of exciting events happening down there.
Anything else? Councilmember Beckman?
Yeah, if, when we have Ruth Eckerd Hall and/or others come and give a presentation, I'd like a good handle on what the cost of that is to the city. So I do have faith in things and like to see the world with a glass half full, but I'm really aware of how much money I have in my bank accounts and how I'm spending my money. And so I'd like to know, you know, have a bigger handle on that. What would be the financial commitment, just a ballpark figure of the city for that? Because, you know, just in my conversations throughout the last almost year, you know, I didn't realize, and this was naive, I guess, that when the Florida Orchestra lobbied to have this built and they want to come and play, and I'd love to sit on the grass and hear them play, that we actually pay them to come and play. That they're not, you know, just walking away with ticket sales and thinks they get a venue, but that's a cost to us.
That's when we do a free concert. They also hope to have concerts where they are charging, and
So
then there wouldn't be a cost to the city. But in the past, when we had the Florida Orchestra, and they used to come periodically, I remember more specifically in 08, 09, we did a free concert, and we did pay $50,000 for that.
Okay. But if they're coming and charging people to come and listen to their music, then we don't pay them anything to come?
That's correct.
Okay,
They're being paid by the gate.
totally, wow, okay. It was my understanding that we still incentivize them to come, but that's okay. But anyway, it's a clear understanding of all that. I want to,
Well, and that's one of the reasons that I think it would be helpful to have people that are actually in the business. I think taking out the lights and the sound, because a lot of the acts bring their own, we're gonna have to have something there for some of those other events that we're talking about, that don't bring in professional equipment and everything. But the sooner we start to at least partner with people that do this on a daily basis, they're gonna be able to answer some of your questions, but they're not gonna be able to answer all the questions until you have more structure.
well, I know, and I mean, and part of my understanding earlier on was that, you know, when I was here as a resident, when Ruth Eckerd Hall was talking to the other council about, you know, the sweet spot of this size venue, that it would fit in with Capitol Theater and Ruth Eckerd Hall, and they really lobbied hard for this one. And so I get it, and so they've had their eye on it, and if they want to come in and manage it, you know, they're local, they've been involved from the get-go, but I would like to know, you know, the cost, and I'd like to know how they're going to handle the firearm issue and outside venues and what that, you know, is potentially going to look like here. So, yeah, you know, there's
That's why I think it would be beneficial to have this next meeting. Because rather than us speculate on what we think, let's go to the source, or many sources. Okay? Well, I think this was a very beneficial meeting. It's a good first step. I appreciate everybody's participation, all the work that staff put into preparing for the meeting as well, and we'll get a date on the calendar for that week of the 22nd. Okay? With that, we're adjourned.